Hi everyone. In this video I'll be trying to make sense of what these terms ontology and epistemology actually mean. What question and challenge are they addressing? So that's the learning objective, just really understanding what do these concepts and questions even mean. And Google texts continuously use these, so it's important for be able to make proper sense of Google. It's important to be sure that we have a good understanding of what challenge are we actually thinking about when we are thinking about epistemology and ontology. And sort of briefly put, it's what world are we theorizing about? So what is it? What's the status of this thing that we're looking out at? That's ontology, and epistemology is then something about how can we access this world? How do we actually know anything? Episteme means knowledge in Old Greek, and onto means being. So what's the status of being of the social science concept? And episteme means the knowledge. What do we actually know? And one could argue that in physics, it's actually possible to really uncover reality. One could make the argument that it's like a treasure hunt, and we're actually able to uncover the mathematical and 100% correct laws prescribing the physical behavior of atoms and planets, etc. One could in principle try to make that argument, because it almost seems like we are uncovering these laws, and as Ricky Gervais said, if we burn all physics books and then sort of start over again, we should actually more or less end up in reasonably similar descriptions. This equation should be the same, and our understanding of atoms should be the same. So one could sort of argue that we are uncovering what reality actually is. When we then get to whether it's motivation or any kind of equations we might work with in the social science about how values of something evolves, it's not as clear that we can say, well, now we've uncovered the reality of motivation. We still have a bunch of different ways of trying to measure this and make sense of this and predict how motivated people are. So it doesn't really in the same way seem to be the case that we can call this a treasure hunt of uncovering the actual law and finding it in a box somewhere. It seems to be the case that there are at least some elements of social science that is different. And that's really what the issue is about. What is this thing we call motivation? What status of being does it have, and how can we access it? And again, the point is that it's somewhat easier to uncover and claim that we're uncovering how the world really looks like in physics, because in the social sciences we have to decide how we define unemployment, and we have to make some assumptions and decisions, and two unemployed people can be different in many different ways. Two hydrogen atoms are not going to be different in many ways. But let me sort of try to, this is sort of what the concepts mean and what questions they represent, but let me try to get a little bit more into what challenge we're facing here. This is just to link back to, this is a very old discussion for anyone who studied some kind of philosophy, and Plato, cave allegory is basically the same thing. What is the status of truth, beauty, and justice? Those were the terms that Plato were interested in. We are in social science, of course, interested in different kinds of concepts, but it's still in principle the same thing. What are these things? How do they exist? Do they exist out there? Let's try to illustrate this by watching something a bit more contemporary than Plato, even though that it's still a couple of decades old, so you might not know this series. It was very popular a couple of decades ago. Let's watch these two people discuss something for a couple of minutes. It's from the show Yes, Prime Minister. They're discussing national service, Værneplikt in Danish.
So he's going to say something new and radical in the broadcast.
What, that silly grand design? Bernard, that was precisely what you had to avoid. How did this come about? I shall need a very good explanation.
Well, he's very keen on it.
What's that got to do with it? Things don't happen just because prime ministers are very keen on them. Neville Chamberlain was very keen on peace.
Yes, he thinks it's a vote winner.
Ah, that's more serious. Sit down. What makes him think that?
Well, the party have had an opinion poll done. It seems all the voters are in favour of bringing back national service.
We'll have another opinion poll done showing the voters are against bringing back national service.
We can't be for it and
Oh, of
against.
course they can, Bernard. Have you ever been surveyed?
Yes, well, not me, actually, my house. Oh, I see what you mean.
Well, Bernard, you know what happens. A nice young lady comes up to you. Obviously, you want to create a good impression. You don't want to look a fool, do you?
No.
No, so she starts asking you some questions. Mr. Woolley, are you worried about the number of young people without jobs?
Yes.
Are you worried about the rise in crime among teenagers?
Yes.
Do you think there's a lack of discipline in our comprehensive schools?
Yes.
Do you think young people welcome some authority and leadership in their lives?
Yes.
Do you think they respond to a challenge?
Yes.
Would you be in favor of reintroducing national service?
Yes. Oh, well, I suppose I might.
Yes or no?
Yes.
Of course you would, Bernard. After all you've told you can't say no to that. So, they don't mention the first 5 questions and they publish the last one.
Is that really what they do?
Well, not the reputable ones, no, but there aren't many of those. So, alternatively, the young lady can get the opposite result.
How?
Mr. Woolley, are you worried about the danger of war?
Yes.
Are you worried about the growth of armaments?
Yes.
Do you think there's a danger in giving young people guns and teaching them how to kill?
Yes.
Do you think it's wrong to force people to take up arms against their will?
Yes.
Would you oppose the reintroduction of national service?
Yes.
There you are.
And the reason I'm then drawing upon such a video as this and this class is it can make us think about, does an independent opinion on national service actually exist? Is there something out there that a proper survey and proper survey questions could get to? Or is the challenge that we simply don't, I mean, maybe people actually have an opinion, but it's just really, really difficult to get to. So we have to accept that our responses is always going to be sort of imperfect. So that's just sort of 2 different challenges. One could argue that these are 2 different challenges. Is it because there is nothing in our, I don't know, in our brains that we can try to dive into? Or is it because even if there was something in our brain that signified whether we have what opinion on national service we have, we just simply can't get to it because whatever way we ask questions, we risk sort of shaping the answer we get and maybe getting another answer than was intended. This is then also the way that it's being described by this tweeter. It's a sort of very famous pollster, and quite famous pollster in the American context. And he's saying a pollster's job should be to find out about already existing opinions, not create ones that already exist. And then the point that is being made here in this video is to say, well, it's actually quite difficult to claim that there is something out there that we're trying to get to, because no matter how we phrase our question, we risk sort of shaping whatever thought people have. So the argument here is that in contrast to when we saw the video with the light poles, where we can say there is a light pulse out there and we are just trying to capture it as adequately as possible, like the treasure hunt example, as if there is something out there that we can get to. The point with this Prime Minister and National Service example is to say it's not clear, at least, that there is something independent out there already existing that we're just trying to get to. Because no matter how we shape and frame our questions, we risk influencing the answers we get. As is being said in the video, of course, we can try to do a decent and good and transparent job about it, not hiding the first 5 questions, but that doesn't change the fact that it's simply a different kind of thing as in many areas in the physical sciences. And I can use actually a Danish example of Tycho Brahe to sort of try to further illustrate that. Tycho Brahe was developing sort of a place to look out into the universe from his island Ven here in Denmark, and at some point he realized that his observatory shook slightly in the wind, making his measurements imperfect. So he could move his instruments into the underground bunkers, and then he sort of continues to optimize that. And I think that's a really interesting example to draw upon here, because here it was quite clear from him, he could sort of clearly identify that wind influences his measurements. So if you went to an underground bunker, there was less wind and sort of less external interference. And if we then try to make the same thing when we measure attitudes about national service or unemployment or stock markets, etc., it's just not clear that we in the same way can say, let's just move the way we ask questions to this angle and then we've solved all our problems. So this is to illustrate that Tycho Brahe could sort of clearly optimize the measurement of planets. The planets are out there. It's the way he's trying to measure it doesn't influence where the planet is. The planet doesn't care about the position of his telescope. Maybe the one's motivation or attitude and all these things, it's not as clear that they're completely independent from the way that we're trying to measure it, as this was Nelson's point as well. So the planet, the measurement of a planet is not, I mean, the planet's position in the universe is not influenced by our telescope, and that's sort of a different situation that we're in. And for Brahe, in other words, it's easier to claim this ontological distinction between measurement and what is measured. It's more clear that these are two distinct things. While the difference between the unemployed person and the way we define unemployment, I mean, these two things are clearly interrelated. And this is, again, the particular challenge we're facing in the business administration that other fields are facing differently. I should, although, add that I've mainly talked about classical physics, and maybe some of you have already heard about quantum physics being sort of different. It's actually the case in quantum physics that we can't both measure the position of a small little thing like a quant and its speed, its momentum. We simply cannot know both things at once, because the moment we try to measure the position, we are influencing the momentum and the speed that this little quant has. So actually there is a kind of an epistemological limit in quantum physics, where it's simply not possible to make these precise measurements, because no matter how you try to measure it, you're influencing whatever you measure. Same thing. No matter how you try to define innovation or firm performance or unemployment, you're making some assumptions and decisions that influences whatever result you're getting out of it. So that's the ontology and epistemology issues, these very abstract issues that I've tried to deal with here. Is, for one, what's the status of the social science concepts and theories? And I hope I've sort of been able to show that Tycho Brahe can sort of claim that he's trying to measure something that is independent from his telescope. It's often more difficult in our business administration field. So it's more difficult to say that we sort of are measuring something independent and real and separate from us. And then furthermore, epistemology, it's not clear that we can sort of easily access this without interfering. So Tycho Brahe had the challenge as well, that he had to take account of the wind, and maybe he has to take other things into account. I don't know, when the Earth is moving a little bit in his underground bunker. So they're still facing the challenge, but it might be a bit easier to make sure that we are measuring exactly what we're going for, rather than the national service example, because how do we and then know if we've actually measured people's opinion on national service, or how motivated they are, or whether we've actually measured unemployment or firm performance? In the end, it's us researchers that decide whether something is the best or most true measurement. So this is why I've used this contrast to physics, because I think intuitively it's more easy to understand that an atom or a planet is something independent from us, and it's out there, and we can get to it, and we can uncover a theory of gravity. And very likely that if we burn all our physics books and then recreate them 1,000 years from now, we'll get to the same answers. It's less clear that this is going to be the case in study of unemployment, supply, demand, efficient market hypothesis, motivation, or whatever business administration concept that we can think about. It's not as clear that we have these distinctions. This was also what Nelson was talking about. Now we're just getting sort of a different kind of terminology that also helps us understand what Gruber's book chapter is about.